Hello, welcome to the new podcast series, King of the Middle, with Michael Joel Green and Chris Moore. Here's Michael Green.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks again for joining in. King of the Middle podcast exploring the union of faith and also creativity, the marriage of the both. Tonight's episode, we're going to be exploring surviving collaboration, what it means to collaborate with someone on an artistic project. Should you do it, or should you go solo? Whether that be music, writing, film, no matter the medium, no matter the endeavor in life, actually. So that's what the focus of tonight's episode is going to be, and let's dive right in. Chris, how's it going, brother?
Man, it's going okay. Speaking of collaborations, working on finishing a project I collaborated on with another friend, something very short, quick podcast that you'll hear more about in this podcast later. But I'm sitting in the trenches of editing, and it's my old days, thank goodness, my old days of the past when I did this stuff for a living. I can go into beast mode and get through rough, terrible stuff that I hate doing more quickly than I would be if I obviously hadn't done it for years. And thank goodness, because I wouldn't be able to do this podcast now with you if I didn't have all those years of being in beast mode, doing all this technical stuff. So I'm very thankful for my past. My failures of the past have given me one success, some technical knowledge that helps me do things in my older, less energetic age.
Yeah, just a little bit of backdrop behind this. The idea for this episode came about sort of by the theme of this whole thing. Chris and I were discussing the podcast and the future of it last week, and we actually got into a mini argument about it. And it was a hard argument for about 20 minutes or so, and I think we finally listened to each other and what the other person was going through and actually experiencing. And sort of like we always do, Chris and I have collaborated a lot in the past. Apologized, and we were good. But it was also, I came out of that thinking, collaborating is hard. When you have a project that is art, creativity is subjective. One person could listen to a song, think it's garbage. The other person could think it's the greatest, most profound piece of music ever written. So when you have something subjective where there are rules, but there are not definite rules as far as you should go this direction right here. It's difficult because you have egos involved. You have differences of opinion on what will make the project better. And Chris and I will speak probably more at length about our audio drama company that we started a few years back called Run Diesel. But I started thinking about it after our conversation last week and going, there's a lot of great themes here in that we're not going to separate. We're not going to, oh, well, I'm done. I'm quitting. So you've got to find a way to work together while also respecting each other. And it made me realize collaboration, though painful it can be, is a great parallel to God in us. God changing us through even with our pride, our egos, but wanting to be in companionship with us, even when we make it hard. So I really like that, and I wanted to explore that. So that's what we're going to do tonight, and we appreciate you tuning in.
Mm-hmm. And I think Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, what was the first project you remember collaborating on?
Real quick, I want to say something as part of your introduction. One thing that's really rare is to find one or other people to collaborate with who you feel like you become family. You can have arguments or disagreements and them, like you said, Michael, not quit. And to say, I think even if I have to have a heated debate, I can get through the disagreement and not disrespect the other person at the end of it because they have a different opinion. And a lot in the way the world operates, people do like, it's okay, we're done. I'm done. I'm finished. I can't deal with you. And I've seen that in my professional career outside of not working. We're focusing on believers, like as believers, as Christians. But I've seen people do both ways out there in the secular world in Hollywood. People who are like, okay, I can roll with the punches that people don't agree, or I can get in a real scuff, dust up with somebody in a disagreement who may have power over me, or somebody who's a partner, and I can get through it and we're fine. And those are the people that do the amazing stuff, I've realized. People who can take a beating. And it goes back to what we've talked about in earlier episodes of this podcast, taking failure or being criticized and being able to triumph over it and accept there's legitimate criticism, which is what our discussion was last week when we kind of talked about this and the amount of work that it is to actually put this, even though it may seem low budget, it's a lot of work for this podcast. And the fact that we can accept that each of us, there were things that we didn't see that were bugging the other person. We can get through it and say, okay, I screwed up. You're right. I'm wrong. Or you're right. I see it from your point of view. And I didn't completely see it. I didn't see the full picture. And it's okay. I can get through that. And I'm not going to crucify myself because I've made a mistake or multiple mistakes. Same thing for you, Michael. I've seen this over and over with you. Okay, I didn't do this the best. Or I could have done something better. That's okay. I'm not going to beat myself down. I may have a moment. I may have a day. I may have a few days. I may have a week beating myself down. But there's a point where it becomes, I'm just going to move on. I'm going to go on, and I'm not going to let this stop me. And I think that's a huge part of comfort collaborating. If you can find people to work with who have that attitude, who believe in you and also who you believe in, who you can get through these difficulties and even accept criticism from each other. And that's been a huge part of what led us to this podcast. And for me, sitting in this seat is because of things that I've experienced, and especially on the road with you, Michael. So I just felt like definitely that needed to be said, that this is a pretty deep rooted, that what we're talking about in this podcast goes pretty deep for us and beyond. So yeah. So anyway, I wanted to say that.
You bring up a great point, and it sort of, this goes way beyond the subject of this podcast, but you mentioned not quitting, or that I had mentioned not quitting. And I think that I got married just a little over a year ago. I got married late, and when getting married late, like I've seen a lot of divorce with friends and loved ones, and so one thing that sticks with me more than anything, it's when you make a vow to someone not to leave. It makes all the difference in the world. It doesn't matter how, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving no matter what. And then you take it, that's the way God does with us. So way down, God, marriage, and then way down here is an artistic project. Maybe insignificant in the long run, but important to us in the moment. And there isn't the same vow you take, obviously, to I'm going to work on an album with this person. But there's still that idea of, my feelings are hurt. I'm not going to walk out of the room, and not come back. I've always, how many bands that we grew up with, you've got, usually it's two. It's usually a guitar player and a singer for the most part, or a bass player. And they have this magical chemistry together. And they make 5, 6, 7 great albums that become sort of staples of your, what am I trying to say? Become like soundtracks to your life. And then what always ends up happening, they break up, one goes solo, and then they get back together 20 years later for the reunion tour. And you realize, their ego, they couldn't get past that. And I get it. Because you and I, Chris and I worked, we'll get into this later probably, but you and I worked on writing an audio drama script together. And it was wonderful. I mean, we had so much fun writing it. We would get together in a room. We were roommates at the time. We'd pace the floor writing. But then trying to make revisions or say this part doesn't work. Oh my gosh, it's painful because your confidence, you're guarding your confidence. And to hear someone say that part of yours stunk, whatever, it's very hard, and it's hard to stick to that, and it's hard to give each other a hug and say I love you after that, and get back to it.
And you're a man with a big heart, so I think we both understand this, that when somebody says, especially somebody that you respect and who you're working with, says, I don't think that's that great. It's like a personal, we mentioned this in the podcast with Lawrence about killing your darlings. I brought it up when he was talking about kids, and your kid comes in the world and you love it. And I was like, yeah, kind of like you do with your art. You bring something into the world and then it becomes your darling. It becomes a living part of you. You hope that it gets out in the world and actually affects people's lives, but sometimes it doesn't exist beyond a Word doc file or notes on a notepad or whatever. But yeah, it's caring enough to say, I'm not going to abandon you, but also, as I've been learning later in life, through just actually being in Christian therapy and understanding just even more how broken I am than I thought I was. I'm even 10 times more broken. And it's like, oh, okay, I've had a little bit of an easier time, not that much easier, but easier, saying, okay, I can accept and see where I'm wrong and where I'm stubborn and where things have to be my way, and where I've always put my identity in my whatever I was doing, I put my identity in that. And if it didn't work out perfectly or somebody criticized, I was like, this criticizes the core of my soul. And that's wrong. That's a totally wrong point of view. And when you're working in collaboration, a few years ago, when we were working on that project, you said, we're working on this audio drama that was also, someday we're hoping to have it as a novel. I was not in that place. I was not prepared yet to be in a place where I could work on something that I really cared about, and then have somebody come to me, a friend, and it wasn't just you. We have another friend that we're working with, and say, man, I just don't believe it, or I just don't like that, or I'm just not into that. It's like, oh my gosh, it's killing your darlings, and having to let go and say, my intellect, that's another thing, my smarts and my creativity are not tarnished by the fact that others said that's not great. I want to be like Kobe Bryant was with, I think I mentioned this, Kobe Bryant was with Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan mentioned in the eulogy for Kobe Bryant, he just came at him and said, I can be better. What am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? How can I get better? To the point where Michael Jordan said he was completely like, get away from me, kid. You're bugging me too much about it. And of course, everybody laughed in the eulogy about that. But I think, boy, there's a lot to learn about wanting to get better and saying, it's okay, I know I'm not great, and I have a lot of ideas that are not great and things that could be better. And there's some things that I think are great that other people aren't going to see the same way, and that's okay. I can accept that too, but I don't have to take being told and then realizing, oh, I had some bad ideas or whatever. That should not be personalized, but the enemy does that. He makes us internalize this stuff to make it so important that we can't possibly get anything done. And that's why I want to do this podcast, as part of a ministry call to say, please, other artists, I know there must be people who are struggling like us, struggling like me, with serious, having a major effect on my view and image of myself, rather than putting it in the Lord and saying, it's okay if I'm not as smart and as great and as talented as I want to be. I'm loved by the Lord, and I'm going to try to do what I can with the gifts he gave me, and just accept that I'm constantly going to have to get better. I'm never going to be great. I'm always going to be working. It'll never happen. And that's a freeing. So anyway.
Yeah. You mentioned the Jordan Kobe thing. I don't know if you had a chance to see the Jordan documentary yet.
I have not, though.
But amazing documentary, by the way. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing about it.
Yeah.
On one hand, you're in awe of the accomplishments, the talent, the drive, And on the other hand, I'm watching that with sympathy or even sadness for the man, because Jordan was so obsessed with winning at all cost that, and he knew that he was the best. So it was never a collaboration. It was drill sergeant to soldier. And I'm speculating here, but I'm guessing that he didn't have many friends. There's actually a couple of clips where he actually like alludes to himself as God and Jesus to those teammates of his. So I think that is a trade-off right there. If you had a chance to be the very, 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 very best, most successful, most applauded, but it came at the expense of relationships, your integrity, making you think you are a god, what would you do? What would you choose? That's a good question.
And then you can't collaborate. He wasn't a collaborator in those times when he had that big ego. That I know, because it becomes the you show. And then you can't collaborate, and then you don't inspire people around you to want to be as great as they can be. Instead, it's just about you, and it's so destructive that, we're trying to avoid that. But we have our innate human tendency is to be that, what you're saying in the documentary. That's, without God, that's what we want to do. But
it's also, I think, for me as a 25-year-old, I was going to be the exception. I was going to have the accomplishments while still having the humility and the witness.
Okay, so for me, some of the earliest collaborations that I had were with people who I knew or I knew them through people who I had gone to school with. And there are a couple of cases where I wound up working with people. In the first case, I worked with somebody who was making a documentary, multiple short ones, but then one longer form one. And that I believed in both the person and I believed in the project when laid out on paper what it was. And I wound up working with this person, I think, on and off. And at a certain point, I was working almost part-time to near full-time some weeks on this documentary. But it became apparent to me, this is a long-term project. It doesn't have an end. It doesn't have a clear set of goals and how it's going to end, how it's going to even come together and to be something that's even going to be worth all this time. Based on my point of view at the time when I was looking at it, I was like, it's kind of this cloud and it's not really shaped clearly. And then also I thought, I don't even know how with all this work going into it, if it's ever going to be seen by anybody. So I got to a point on that project where, as a believer, this person was a believer too. I just had to say, I've got to move on because I've got work. I've actually found some work and it's working with people. They're not believers, but it's a real salary job and a real professional position. And I have to go do it. And that wasn't the easiest to tell this person. And that person was gracious, but was still like, what can I do to convince you to stay, to keep working? And literally it was like, there's nothing, because this project doesn't have an end. This project could go on. And it turns out I looked the project up a couple months ago. And I was like, I wonder whatever happened with that thing and that person. Well, that person moved away from California and it took them 8 more years before that project was done. And that was exactly my point, that collaborating, sometimes your heart is in a place where I want to work with people, but you have to have the smarts and the business savvy to say, is this worth my time for ministry purposes? Is it worth my time, just the relationship with this person? Or is it worth my time for my career? You have to weigh those to see what's the most important. But the one thing that no matter which of these things, career and learning and ministry with your relationship to the person directly, what you do at the end, you have to say, I have to handle this in a godly manner. It doesn't matter what the answer is of these three, that the answer is no. And I don't know if I'd give you, I don't think you can take a formula that says if two of these three things, ministry, relationship, and pay, it's 2 out of 3, like the cheap, fast, and good. You can only have 2 of them. I'm not even saying that I know what the formula. One could be enough for you to say, yes, I'll do it. But when it comes time to say, this is it, it's keeping that relationship intact as much as possible, being godly about it is the most important. And that was one of the earlier lessons I learned from surviving collaboration. And then I had another situation with somebody who I worked with, similar believer, and we had some success because we worked on a documentary series that did air on TV. It aired on limited run on some PBS stations across the country. But we got to the end of this thing, and financially, I liked this project. It was on comedians and content from the turn of the 20th century and the early 1900s. It was Chaplin and Buster Keaton and all these guys. And I really liked what the project was about, but it was clear to me, this is not a career-making. I'm not going to make enough money. I'm not going to make enough money to even pay my bills, let alone build a career on doing this kind of project. So we did some limited, we did a couple series, and then I was like, I've got to go get paying work again in an industry job. And because I always dipped in and out of industry jobs, things are always changing and in flux, and I was always working as a freelancer or limited run at a company and then would move on. So it was very interesting that, again, I had to learn, I want to maintain our friendship because I believe in you and what you're doing, but financially and for my career, this isn't going to help me anymore at this point. I have got to get more stable in my life, in my career. So anyway, those are 2 early examples of things that happen where I believe that I maintained integrity, because one of the friends, I still talk with him and I'm still hoping to get to see him soon. These projects were over almost 20 years ago, 18 years ago. But so anyway, Michael, do you have examples possibly from your music days where you navigated these relationships?
Man, I love collaboration. I've always loved it. It's butting heads, but it's so wonderful, especially when you find. My earliest one, I think, was my first band in Seattle, which I think I've mentioned on this show before. My friend of mine, Jason. I had just moved to Seattle, didn't know a person there, had never sung in a band before, but that was my dream. And I found this guitar player, Jason, and we formed a band. And it was, man, I would write the lyrics, and I would write the melody lines, and he would write the guitar parts and the music. And we had a great connection, man. We could write some good songs together, and I would spend. I remember being like at IHOP at 2 a.m. some nights, just pot of coffee and writing lyrics. You know. I was too raw of a singer back then. And so after, I think we were together, I think our band was together maybe a year, maybe less, but I had not progressed as much as they wanted me to have. And so they asked me to leave. And that was crushing, man. They asked me if I wanted to play guitar in the band and get a new singer, and I refused. Looking back, tons of regret over that move. That was some ego right there. But Jason and I actually stayed extremely tight friends. And when I moved to LA, I ended up living with him and his wife for the first 4 months until I found an apartment here. So we still talk. We do a weekly Bible study with Jason and Chris and 3 other guys. So we're extremely tight. I then formed a new band that was pretty much 3 other people playing my songs. So I was a sole writer, and it was fine. I didn't have the networking side, I've never been a good networker and a go-getter. I've been the I want to stay home and write a song kind of mentality, which is not the way to go if you're pursuing a career in music or film or acting or writing. If you don't do that other part, you're not going to do anything. But we were together and we played some good shows. I think that I was writing mostly just like my band with Jason. We were heavy. I mean, we were really hard. And now I'm writing all the songs on an acoustic guitar and playing sort of ballady type stuff. And it was great. I loved being kind of the songwriter but I don't know. Two of the people ended up moving out of town or something, so we split up. And then I took that bass player and we tried to form another band, and we ended up with one of my other best friends, this guy John, and we formed a band. But here's the takeaway. It's whoever wrote the song was going to get to sing it. And John was writing kind of more of the style we were into, which at the time was, post Pumpkins, but still loving some Pumpkins, Sunny Day Real Estate, all these bands. It's a little harder than the stuff I was doing. So my ego was sort of deflated because I think I got to sing 1-2 songs that I had written that actually fit the style. But for the most part, John was doing most of the singing. I was doing backing vocals, and I loved it. I mean, our voices blended really nicely together, but that was me finally at the point to where I don't have to be the frontman singer. In this band, we're writing some really good songs. And then John ended up, his band from Redding, California, moved back to Seattle, and they asked him to be in it again, so we ended up breaking up because he rejoined that band. And then I moved to LA. So that was kind of my musical collaborations, which have been trying, but they've been really great. Because when there is truly a creative zone that happens when it's usually on stage or even just jamming, but when you hit that zone and that you can't even explain it, but next thing you know, it's like, oh my gosh, where did that come from? Where did that guitar part come from? Oh my gosh, I love that right there. Put that in there. I would carry this was before digital. I would have like little handheld cassette tape players, and I'd string them up before each practice to record the practices. And I would go all week long just listening to old practice tapes, just trying to mine for the smallest nugget of melody or whatever. But when you find that, it's awesome. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And you were working with people who were believers, which is great because you had a similar heart for the projects.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat that. We would do Bible studies before practice. That was pretty cool. I remember. I think that was in the band with Jason. Yeah, we would do a Bible study beforehand, and then we would turn the amps up really loud and blast everybody out of the room. Yeah.
How does that differ from any experiences collaborating you had where you didn't work with believers? Maybe it wasn't even in music.
Probably when I started writing, novel, not book-wise. I always have worked day jobs, 9 to 5, cubicle, corporate cubicle jobs. And I was in LA. I was playing music, but I was also acting, and I worked doing benefits administration. A lot of paper pushing for this company in Santa Monica. And I had a work contact who worked for, I would be in charge of like employees' health benefits. So I would work with insurance carriers and stuff. And I had a contact from our insurance carrier who was this single mother that lived up sort of near the Nevada border in Northern California, up near the mountains. And we were work contacts for probably 3 years, but we were email buddies. And she was the most brilliantly creative imaginative person I've ever known. Could just pull brilliant ideas out of thin air. So we would spend our days, and both of us probably had too much, it was probably slow at work, but we would spend our days emailing, kind of making up song lyrics to each other. She would read some of my memoir type writing and comment on it and stuff. And this is at the point where I loved acting. I mean, being on stage, being in that moment, when you literally you feel like you can do anything you want in the pin drop silence. But the frustration that comes with it, the frustration, the driving 40 hours a week in standstill traffic to do a 30-second audition for a casting director that never even looks at you. These things, death by 1,000 paper cut kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I was sort of at that mode where I was really, really burned out of that side of it. And I got into work one morning, and there was an email from this woman saying, "Here's what we're gonna do today. I'm gonna write a paragraph of a story, then you write the next paragraph, and then we're just gonna take turns writing the next paragraphs." So she had written a paragraph about a 12-year-old boy that sees a monster on a school bus. So I was like, okay, cool. So I kind of wrote a little paragraph, and sent it back to her. She back and forth. That end of that day, we had like probably 5 pages written or so. I don't remember, but we kept it going the next day, and then we kind of realized this is really awesome. I love what's going on here. Let's keep going with this. So we stopped doing the alternating paragraphs, and I would take a chapter or a scene, and she would as well. But by 2 weeks, we had probably 50 pages, and so I sent it to a buddy of ours who is a screenwriter. I was like, "Am I crazy, or is this pretty good?" And he wrote me back, and he's, "Mike, you got to keep going with this. This is really cool." So that kind of allowed me to quit acting to start a writing career. The relationship that was the real story. Probably we had never met. We had been email buddies for 3.5 years. I literally had never seen I wouldn't have been able to pick her out in a room of 5 people. But yet we had developed this relationship over email and work contact. So we started writing this book together, and we started fighting a lot. She had a tough life, and I think for her it was an escape when she needed an escape. It's got to be fun, or she's not going to do it. And I was looking at it like, this is it. This is my shot, And so I became very taskmaster-like, wanting to put us on a writing schedule. And for her, it was, well, if I feel like it, all right, And I think there was also that sort of, you're developing or forming a relationship where you're not getting the whole picture of the person. So we had been buddies for 3.5 years, and next thing you know, we're trying to have these writing phone calls and stuff, and we're just fighting because I can't get her to work. She's not giving me what I need, and for her it was, she's seeing this other side of me that is shattering this picture of me and stuff. So we ended up splitting up. Now there was a lot of drama with that. That's a story in itself. But for me, we had too much written. So I was like, I can't quit this. But I didn't think there was any way in the world I could ever write a novel by myself. I'd never done it before. But I couldn't quit it. So I kept going and finished. Now the whole book was schizophrenic. I mean, her writing style was all fun, probably written for about 2 or 3 years younger. Everything to me was, I have to be having people weeping and crying, melodramatic at every turn. So it was very, the differences were glaring. So, you know, it was a great lesson. But relationally, I'm not getting into a lot of it, but it was really hard because you saw a relationship sever and be torn apart because of your trying to collaborate on something creative, and you didn't have. Well, you are right. We didn't have the shared faith. Two, I was a man, single man. She was a single woman. I'd never even seen her face to face. We probably shouldn't have. We might have not. It might have not been healthy for us to be in such a intimate relationship, such as writing a book together. And that's that was the end of a friendship. Albeit a one strictly based on digital.
Yeah, it was based on a project, and that is something where if you don't have the ability to connect in that way spiritually, it's more of a risk that something like this is going to happen. And one of the few circumstances where I worked with people who were, other than when I was working in the industry, when I actually did freelance work, one of the few times I did anything with somebody who was not a believer is a couple of guys who were really fun. One guy was from New York. This other guy was a writer out here, and they were doing spec commercial spots because they wanted to get out and do commercials, and they started doing a film, and I helped them on a bunch of projects. And the reason I almost forgot about them, but I've been going through old tapes looking at projects I've done either with other people or projects that I did on my own, or just old editing projects and all kinds of stuff. And I pulled up this tape that had the work I did with them. I was like, oh yeah. Every now and then, like every 8 years or so, I'll think, I wonder what happened to those guys. Because the interesting thing about it was they were really fun, creative. We were working on short projects. We got along like the way you would dream of working with fellow Christians. But just one day, all of a sudden, I just never heard from them again. We were working on something, and then that was it. And I know it wasn't like I'm not doing a good job for them, because I wasn't charging them next to anything. And it was at a time when I was between industry jobs, and we had fun and stuff was coming out well, and they always liked it. So, and then I found out later, well, one of the guys went back to his family business. He decided that it was this time in Hollywood was up, and the other guy had other stuff going on, but I just never heard from them. And that was also kind of the sense of when you're working with people who you don't have deep ties with, it's easy for them to just walk away. You may never hear from them again. As far as I know, have you ever heard from the woman that you were co-writing that book? Yeah. So these things can break, and that's why we're called, as in our walk, to do better than that, to be better, to try to keep these relationships intact, even if we have disagreements. And I think that what I know of you and I, and what we're talking about in this podcast, I think we've done a decent job of that with our fellow believers, people that we really have relationship with that are beyond the project, but man, it's tough regardless. It's tough navigating this stuff. And again, when you put your heart on the line and somebody says, I'm not there. So, we've worked on this audio podcast project before we started. We're working on a number of books, but we're working on a book series where we talk about modern contemporary issues, and we're doing some Bible study stuff that goes with it. And we've done some audio dramas with a friend, a partner, and we're going to do some audiobook versions of this stuff that we're writing. But we worked for years for this audio drama company, and we came up against some of those issues where we're not all on the same page with what we wanted to do, not only in the story, or were we all at times in sync, like two of us might agree and one doesn't, and then two do agree and then the other guy doesn't agree. And plus we had throw in the mix that one of our buddy found out that he had cancer while we're in the middle of this thing. And we never completely recovered from that, because he's got to look out for his life and his health. he can't be stressed out about starting a company dealing with the things he's dealing with.
Yeah.
So, but it was interesting because, and even Dash there agrees.
Yeah, that's hard stuff, man. I think though it's very easy to kind of warn against the pitfalls. But I think as we're trying to wrap things up, man, I want to really hammer on, especially for friends, or even not, especially for people that share a common goal, share a common faith. What are the benefits of collaboration?
Yeah, benefits. That's a great question, because I definitely have experienced a lot of good. The project that you and I were on before we've gone off working together on this podcast and on authoring some projects together, we came into this project with audio drama, and I've never put myself out there with my storytelling in this way. I mentioned in the past podcast that I did a student film, 20-minute long film that I did in grad school, shot on film, post-production, everything, and never released it because I was too scared of what people would think, that they think, he's not that smart. This guy's not that sharp. He's pretty dim-witted. He did this project. And it kept me for years from ever trying to release any music, anything that I was working on and tinkering with. It kept me from every kind of creative endeavor of any particular value other than, okay, I'm pretty decent at editing. But the thing about editing is most of the time I'm working on other people's stuff and I'm working with other people. So I have a fallback. It's not just on me. I'm not really showing you what I'm capable of in some projects I've co-created, but mostly there's a protection. Doesn't matter if it's not the greatest, it's not just me. But when I started working with you and our buddy, I had to start putting stuff out that I was writing and thinking, man, this is expressing what I think about the world and I'm passionate about this. And then ideas would get shot down and I would just be like, no, I have to argue until I'm blue in the face why I'm right. And what I learned because of what we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, when you're working with friends who really care for you and you care about them and you're not going to quit, there is something to be said for how you can eventually you learn, hopefully if your relationship survives that working relationship, you realize I can let my guard down and say, okay, we can disagree and I can do things your way. I don't have to do them my way. I can, and the great thing that came from working with you over the years, and that includes more recently when we've been writing, is taking some criticisms from you sometimes that were very compassionate but very intense. And I was like, my initial reaction, I want to say, oh man, is this really just the way you do things or is this right? And there are quite a few things that you've helped me with in the last couple of years where it was like, no, you're right. I need the criticism that I'm getting from somebody who really does want to see me succeed because it is helping me to become better at using the gifts God gave me. Now, whether I'm going to make a living doing that or not, I don't know. But in my walk, it's changing me as a person because it's helping me in every aspect, including being married and being able to deal with criticism in my marriage and say, okay, I'm not doing everything perfectly well. There's better potential for me to be who I can be, that God wants me to be, that I'm not there. And I'm going to be on that constant journey until I'm dead. But it's okay that I'm not there. It's okay that my talent isn't where I want it to be. It's okay that I'm not perfect. And learning that and the amount of pressure that comes off your shoulders when you start to accept letting your guard down and saying, I'm not going to take my identity and stash it in what I'm doing. I'm going to let go and say, okay, let me take criticism for what I'm doing. Let me take criticism for my work. Let me take criticism, and it spills out into relationships in many different degrees, not just creative ones. And there's great stuff to be learned. And if you can work with other believers who care about you, who are going to work with you and say, I want you to succeed. I'm going to give you criticism because we need to sharpen each other, but I care. That is the biggest benefit, and I've seen in the last 2 years, probably more than anything, 2 to 3 years, a huge change in the way my brain works and the way I see the world because of working with believers, which happens to be you and one of our other buddies, and more than anybody else. And that is, for me, that is the biggest thing that I've gained from it. So what do you think? How have things work for you?
I want to just really quickly add in there, I remember when we were writing that script together, and we were also roommates, you would be writing at the table or even editing, because you did all the sound design, and I'd look over and you would have tears running down your face because what you were working on was moving you so much. And I that was great to see, because that was when that happens, like, oh, that was from the gut, that was from the heart, that was some good stuff. So there were some really great times when I would look over and see you just move to tears. I think for that, I've got a dog jumping on me right now. He's going to be the star of this show.
You should show people.
I'm trying. He won't let me pick him up right now. He's just biting my hand.
That's perfect example of collaboration.
Amen.
Not going to do what I want you to do.
Not going to do.
I'm sure what I want is right, and what you're
still
rebelling
get
against
fed
me
tonight. We're still gonna take you for a walk in the morning.
Good old Dash is the perfect metaphor for this conversation.
I'm gonna get one of these episodes. He's gonna sit with me, but probably. I mean, when you're collaborating with someone like-minded, and there's stuff you come up with that you're adding double the talent. I mean, so by definition, you've got double the talent and double the creativity going. The potential for something really, really magical is there. And that's, now I write novels. Most of those are very solo efforts, excuse me. Mm-hmm. So I'm not at all saying that. I mean, some of our favorite musicians are solo artists. So I'm not at all. I'm just saying that when you add that other like mind who has equal, if not more, talent than you, there's some real potential there to you just make really good relationships. I mean, assuming I didn't know Jason before I moved to Seattle and saw an ad in a music newspaper. I didn't know anybody, but yet I made all of these friendships in Seattle that with whom I still keep up with, because of this collaboration and desire to collaborate. Are the times that you and I and Tom have worked together. There's been some butting heads, but man, the memories you make, and also just the bond, the intimacy you form with the other, and it's just brotherhood, man. So, there's a lot of other stuff. The advantages, I could go on. You develop a thicker skin because of what you're saying. I was always very thin-skinned way back when. I couldn't even listen to myself on tape or cassette or CD, my voice or whatever. Even acting, I didn't want to watch what because there's so much judgment and self-doubt there. But when you're collaborating with someone, you have to they give you feedback, just like you've been saying, and you have to learn to take that. Yep. And so when you would give me feedback on our projects, it's there are times when it stings, of course, but now I think I think we probably both are getting to the point where I have to have that. So I know for you, both of us, I know it's like anytime I write something, it's like, here, the people I respect, whose opinion I respect, have at it, shred it if you have to. And that's a great, like, God wants us to be at that place, it's, I think I think in all walks of life, we need an accurate inventory of, what is that Paul in the Bible says, like, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. I'm paraphrasing, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
in every area of your life, like, we should not be thinking of ourselves higher than we ought. So I know how much work I have as a spouse to really love my wife. I know how I have not loved God with all my heart. I know how I have not loved my neighbor as myself. And even in artistic, creative collaborations, this teaches us how to love each other even when you're banging heads. I mean, you and I, we come to blows every now and then, not physically, but we'll go out to the bar and have a drink, and we're right as rain as soon as we leave, So
I think that's good to have relationships where you don't want to be surrounded with people who just agree. And I would say one thing as we're wrapping up, though, boy, it's hard to find people that will actually, you'd think, it's easy to get people to criticize your work. Well, believe it or not, it's actually not that easy to find people who are willing to be on your side and say, okay, well, let me look at what you're doing and give you opinions. It's actually amazing. And of course, when you're writing, I get it, because if you start handing people books and say, can you read and tell me what you think of this? It's hard enough for people to have time to sit down and watch 40 minutes of TV, an episode of TV at night for some people, let alone look at a book that might take you 10 hours to read or 8 hours. So I think that's one thing too. Hopefully we'll be, through this podcast, encouraging people to connect. Maybe they'll connect through us, through our social connections and social media, to find people to work with and find people to help, and even be willing to just be a critical eye in a compassionate way. And I would say one thing I learned from working, that's a trick, a tip that I learned from working with others, especially with you and our buddy Tom, was I stopped saying, when it comes to telling a story, I'm just going to stop trying to write my story and just submit it and say, what do you think? I'm going to start doing treatments, outlines first, and then treatments, and go through a 3-tier process where I say, here's an outline, here's a treatment for what I'm going to do if it's more than a few page story, and then I'll write it, and then I'll say, give me notes. However, I don't expect radical notes after the treatment notes and being brutalized, through that, to then say, I really don't like your story or this or that. I'm like, well, there's nothing I can do about that, because that's why I went through the outline and then the treatment phase, which is pretty gnarly. So it's helped me to also learn techniques how to let go easier, which is not committing to the whole project until I've talked it over with somebody in some detail, and also taking time, taking a break. I was talking to a friend recently, a few weeks ago, that for me, I found out that from writing, at least 1, 2, 3 weeks, letting something sit is pretty good time to be able to let go. Sometimes just a week. Sometimes 3 weeks or 4 is good. And then if it's more than 4 or 5 weeks, that makes it a lot easier to say, I don't care how much work I put in it. If I have to throw 50% of this thing away, I got to throw it away, because I'm not married to it anymore. But you can't, the worst thing to do when you're taking criticism and collaborating with others and taking loving criticism is to say, I just wrote this, I put all this work into it, I just can't possibly change it. You've got to distance yourself in any trick and technique way that you can, mental gymnastics, to let yourself let go. Time is good, and treatments are a good way to work around that issue. I would highly recommend that to people.
Yeah, so. And you're touching on some subjects that might be separate podcasts in themselves. One, how to get honest feedback. And 2, how to take it. I mean, you and I, we know a guy who was a writer, screenplay guy, and he wrote a screenplay years ago, and got some pretty harsh feedback, and would not accept it. Plowed forward making this film that, and didn't do too well. And I think his comment to a couple of the people that gave him feedback were, you just don't get it, or something like that. So
that's a classic line that a lot of people.
Yeah, and I've been there, and I've been there myself. The hard thing is, and again, this is probably a separate podcast episode, but honest feedback. I mean, your friends are always going to tell you,
Yep.
"Oh, good, it was good for you," kind of thing, because
Yep.
they don't want to hurt your feelings.
Yeah.
And we love them for that.
Yeah.
But you're talking now about, you've got to create something that is good enough. That has to be good enough to actually, should God bless it, or should the opportunity come, it's got to be good enough to reach an audience.
Mm-hmm. And you have to be aware. Sorry, I'll interrupt. That you have to be aware too that the flip side of the good criticism is the prophet is never respected in his own town. You can use his mindset, I just amongst my friends, if they don't like it and people are giving me bad criticism, it's like I'm a prophet in a town. I'm not saying that the work is prophetic work. I'm just saying it's a creative work, and I've found myself in that trap before too. Like, you're never respected in your hometown, so to speak, quote unquote hometown, meaning in your family, and you have to be careful because that's not true. No, so that's good subject matter for another discussion. Absolutely,
it's our way of protecting ourselves. But we're going to close it. But one of the reasons we're doing this is because we're talking about making a living with this, which is something we've been trying to do for a long time, most of my professional life. So this isn't, we're not talking about how to just have a hobby. If we were, then okay is good enough. But we're not. We're talking about how to have a vibrant faith, and to have walking with God, trusting in God, while also pursuing a career in these creative fields. And so that's what we're talking about here. And so when we're talking about feedback, and so you've got to find those that understand that. So they actually have to be knowledgeable enough and professional enough to know, and if something isn't good, why is it not good? And then you have to have the softness of heart not to defend yourself, and actually just say, oh yeah, that's not good enough, then I have to go and rework that.
And I would argue that even if you're not going to make a career from it, that's still, our mindset is you make something as great as it can be. In other words, make it powerful, make it good. Don't accept, it's okay, or that's the best, whatever it can be. That's actually what we're trying to not do. We're saying, I don't care if you never get paid, but you want it to be as good enough that you could be getting paid for what you're doing. That I think is our mindset. Amen. What we're going to be talking about is be excellent, or, then you can doodle, but that's not what we're talking about, noodling around. So if you want to send us out, I think we'll continue this conversation in a future podcast or vidcast.
You got it.
We have a lot to talk about.
That's true. Well, we want to thank you all for listening. This has been another episode of King of the Middle, and we will see you next week. Have a great, great week, the rest of the week, and a great weekend.
Yes, God bless, and thank you, and adios for now.
Amen.
Bye-bye.